Hi, my name's Ollie, and in this Politics Explained video, I'm going to go through everything you need to know about minor parties, the Liberal Democrats, and political parties in context in A-level politics. So that's not just all the knowledge you need to know, but also some key specific examples and key points of analysis, as well as the key questions you could get asked so that you can be properly prepared for the exam. So I'm going to start by going through the parts of the specification this video covers. From there, I'm going to look at some key potential essay questions or key debates, so kind of the real key questions you could get asked in relation to this topic. From there, I'm going to look at minor or emerging parties. So starting with the Lib Dems, in the specification they're included as a major party, but I really don't think they're a major party anymore, and I think it's highly unlikely you're going to get asked a question just about the Lib Dems. So I've kind of included them as a minor party with a bit more detail than the other minor parties. So I'm going to look at minor emerging parties, looking at their policies, and kind of their influence in history. So starting with the Lib Dems, then going into the Scottish National Party, the SNP, then looking at UKIP slash the Brexit Party, the Green Party, and finally Plaid Cymru. So that's going to be the first part. Firstly, looking at minor parties, their policies, and the kind of the history of the parties. From there, I'm going to look at some key debates over the party system and the importance of minor parties. So that's going to be first looking at different party systems and the debate over which party system the UK currently has, whether that's kind of a two-party system or a multi-party system. From there, I'm going to look at kind of the key debate over the importance of minor parties in the UK. And then finally, going to kind of look at political parties in context and look at the key factors that affect party success, which is kind of one of the key questions you get asked, looking at party funding, the electoral system, party leadership, the media, policy, competence, and how united a party is. And then finally, going to go back to the essay questions I'm going to look at the start of the video and kind of go through after looking at the content, how you could potentially answer some of those questions. So yeah, the PDF that you're seeing up there, you can find in the first link in the description on the Politics Explained website, where you can also find lots of resources, such as essay plans and essays and these everything you need to know guides to help you in your A-level politics, if that's something you're interested in, as well as a place to sign up for tutoring if you think you'd benefit from it. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So starting off with the key parts of the specification this lesson covers. So on the Politics Explained YouTube channel, there are 3 other videos on the political parties topic. One covering the Conservative Party, one covering the Labour Party, and one covering the kind of the 2.1, which is an introduction to political parties and party funding. This video covers everything else, right? So it's looking at the Lib Dems, which are included in the spec as a major party, but I'm kind of teaching them mainly kind of as a minor party. From there, also kind of 2.3, emerging and minor UK political parties, looking at the importance of other political parties in the UK and their ideas and policies. You're only supposed to know the ideas and policies of 2 other minor parties. I'm giving you a lot more than that, so that you can kind of pick the ones that you've learnt in class or the ones you particularly want to memorise for the exam or learn for the exam. And then the final part is UK political parties in context. So looking at the development of a multi-party system and its implications for government, as well as looking at various factors that affect party success and kind of debating the relative influence of them. So yeah, in terms of the key kind of essay questions or key debates you can get asked in relation to this topic, first one's kind of on the influence of minor parties in UK politics. So how much influence do they have? Is it only the major parties that have influence, or are minor parties having increasing influence? Second one, kind of linked to this, is does the UK have a 2-party system? Kind of debates over the UK's party system. The third one is kind of key factors affecting the success of political parties. So that's that kind of second part in political parties in context, and the final part of this video. And the final one is you could get questions on the overall policy differences or similarities between parties. I think these are more likely to just focus on the Labour and the Conservative parties, which you'll see in different videos. But you could get overall questions as well, where you can bring in the minor parties and the Lib Dems as well. So yeah, in terms of preparing for the exam, if you do kind of key detailed essay plans on the questions in bold, I think you should be relatively well prepared. I'm going to be making detailed essay plans for these, which you should be able to find soon on the Politics Explained website, if you want to look at the ones I've made rather than making them yourself. But I think making them yourself can be a really useful way to revise, so consider that too. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the start of the video. So minor or emerging parties. So the first of these is the Liberal Democrats. So firstly, looking at the kind of history of the Liberal Democrats, and that's with the Liberal Party. So the Liberal Party is the kind of earliest form of liberalism in the English political system, and that was in the 17th century when the Whigs emerged as opponents of the Tories. In the mid-19th century, they joined a variety of kind of middle and working class supporters, supporting social and political change to form the Liberal Party, who became kind of one of the two parties with the Conservative Party in UK politics at the time. From then until the start of World War One, as I said, they remained one of the two major parties and competed with the Conservative Party, and for decades it was either the Conservative Party or the Liberal Party in government. At the start, these were very much classical liberals. So these were committed above all else to the freedom of the individual and the minimal role of government in society. So in the 19th century, they supported free trade, the widening of the franchise, the extension of civil liberties to those outside of the Anglican Church, and the widening of educational opportunities. Some of this you'll be covering in liberalism as well. And Gladstone, who was the most notable leader and prime minister, was a key classical liberal and unsuccessfully attempted to give Ireland home rule as part of the UK in the late 19th century. Then you also have modern liberals in the party. So modern liberals recognise that many individuals couldn't be truly free due to the inequalities produced by free market capitalism. So this modern liberalism really came about later on, especially moving into the start of the 20th century. And the definition of freedom moved from being simply left alone, kind of negative freedom, to the state actively supporting some members of society to enable them to be free and reach their potential. So that's kind of a more positive liberty view. And the new liberal governments in the early 20th century marked the beginning of modern liberalism, adopting a range of social reforms such as old age pensions, national insurance, in an attempt to discourage the working class from supporting the newly founded Labour Party and kind of then maintain support for the Liberal Party. Ultimately, however, the Liberal Party declined following World War One. So in the decades following World War One, it declined rapidly, due in large part to a rivalry between its two most significant figures, Asquith and David Lloyd George. The Liberals attempted to appeal to both the middle and working classes, with kind of the widening of the franchise after the end of the First World War, but suffered from an inability to define their identity in an era of increasing class polarisation between Labour and the Conservatives, who became, and still remain today, the two main parties. In the post-World War II consensus era, their representation fell to single figures in elections, and even though the party experienced short revivals in terms of support and votes in the early 60s and 70s, they really suffered under first past the post and failed to make a breakthrough. So that's kind of the start with the Liberal Party. And then you have the emergence of the Liberal Democrats, which kind of largely follow on from the Liberal Party in the 1980s. So in 1981, the Liberals received a boost from the break-off of the centre-left Social Democratic Party from the Labour Party. So these were a number of MPs within the Labour Party who weren't happy with the leftward direction the Labour Party was going in under Michael Foot and broke off. So the SDP formed an alliance with the Liberals and fought the 1983 and 1987 general elections as the SDP Liberal Alliance. And this kind of alliance ultimately formed the Liberal Democrat Party in 1988. Their share of the vote grew gradually, and in the 1997 election they gained a total of 46 seats, so quite a significant number, due to their careful targeting of seats and disillusionment with the Conservatives, as well as the role of tactical voting, with Labour voters quite happy to vote for the Lib Dems in order to kind of stop the Conservatives winning a seat. By 2005, their total had risen to 62 seats, an impressive achievement, but still not enough to make them a credible independent challenger for power. And proportional representation could have really helped them because they were receiving a lot higher proportion of votes than the seats they were granted, but it hasn't yet been implemented. What you then have is in the early 2000s, you have Charles Kennedy and kind of was a key leader, and he was a real modern liberal. So in some areas, notably constitutional reform, civil liberties and internationalism, expressed by being very pro-EU, pro the European Union, the Lib Dems have been consistent in their policy, but in other ways, they haven't always been in agreement as to how to project themselves. So when New Labour was in power, and especially under Charles Kennedy, they were a centre-left party, rather than trying to be kind of between between Labour and the Conservatives. They were opposed to the Iraq War, identity cards and tuition fees, and wanted to introduce a new 50% tax rate for those earning over £100,000. So quite a modern Liberal Party. You also have in the party, however, and this is kind of the kind of wing of the party that really came into power under Nick Clegg, kind of kind of liberals who are a bit more moving back to classical liberalism. So these were kind of known as economic or Orange Book liberals, who took their name from a book written in 2004, kind of part written by Nick Clegg, and it kind of really kind of went a bit back to classical liberalism. So really emphasizing free market solutions to problems, um, but still emphasizing the party's traditional commitment to the freedom of the individual. So really emphasizing that freedom of the individual, and therefore kind of differing from Charles Kennedy's more collectivist approach, kind of of Charles Kennedy's social modern liberals. Nick Clegg became party leader in 2007 and aimed to position the party so that it could conceivably work in coalition with one of the major parties. In the 2010 election, their manifesto included making the first £10,000 people earn tax-free, which is introduced as the personal allowance. I think it's now £12,500. Scrapping university tuition fees for undergraduate students, changing the tried nuclear missile system, and backing constitutional reform. So that's an idea of some of their key policies in 2010. And ultimately, after 2010, after the election, they joined the coalition. So Lib Dems won 57 seats, a lot lower kind of the percentage than they kind of potentially should have done, because considering they got 23% of the vote. But they were able to go into coalition with the Conservatives, having favoured them over Labour. So Clegg kind of saw his role and the role of the Lib Dems as moderating the policies of the Tories in a less confrontational style of politics. But this proved very difficult to achieve. Ultimately, the party kind of joined the coalition as they were persuaded that due to the financial crisis and which the country was in, it needed to go along with the Conservatives' immediate austerity policies, and they needed to join government to kind of show the public that they were a credible and responsible party in government, and not kind of running away at a time of national emergency. But ultimately, by taking part in the coalition, the kind of Lib Dems became associated with a number of unpopular Tory party policies, which were contrary to centre-left heritage. So they became associated with the Tory party's harsh austerity policies. They U-turned on their promise to not increase undergraduate tuition fees, and saw a more proportional electoral system rejected by the electorate in the 2011 alternative vote referendum. So the coalition really didn't go well for the Lib Dems of the party. And that can be seen in the 2015 election, when they went down from 57 seats and 23% of the vote to just 7.9% of the vote and just 8 seats. So despite Tim Farron taking over from Nick Clegg for the 2017 election after that, they once again did badly. And in the 2019 election, they were able to increase their share of the vote slightly to 11.6%. But due to first past the post, once again, they won just 11 seats, including their leader at that election, Joe Swinson's seat. In 2019, the reason why, or one of the key reasons that why they were able to win slightly more votes than before, is due to their revoke Article 50 and stop Brexit platform, which are kind of the strongest of any parties in terms of stopping Brexit. And as a consequence of this, their results in the last 3 elections, in my opinion, the Lib Dems shouldn't really be considered a major party anymore, and have significantly decreased in relevance, support, and power since 2010. Part of their support used to be due to tactical voting, and the fact they were the kind of natural protest vote for voters who normally supported the Conservative Party but weren't comfortable voting for Labour instead. But now with Starmer moving the Labour Party closer to the centre, the Lib Dems once again may struggle in the next election, as many of these voters may not use the Lib Dems as a protest vote anymore, but actually go straight from the Tories to Labour. Since 2019, the Lib Dems have been led by Ed Davey, who is only known to a very small section of the public, so kind of really have decreased in relevance. In terms of the current policies and ideas of the Lib Dems, they oppose tax rises, including the Conservatives' plans to increase national insurance contributions, arguing that it would hurt working families the hardest. So that's showing that kind of classical liberalism, kind of Orange Book liberals thought maintains in the party. They also strongly back green causes and green investments, and say that the Conservatives can't be trusted on climate change. But in terms of gaining support from this, they're struggling, right? Because their thunder's being stolen by Labour, by the Green Party. They also continue to support constitutional reform, including reforming the House of Lords and introducing proportional representation. They oppose vaccine passports and the Conservatives' introduction of voter ID as a requirement for voting, arguing that both are illiberal. So that's really showing a kind of the strong kind of liberal, their kind of really strong liberal policies within the party. In many areas, their policies and arguments are being overshadowed by those of other parties and pressure groups, and as I said, the Lib Dems are increasingly struggling to stay relevant. So yeah, that's everything in terms of the Lib Dems, in terms of the kind of history of the Lib Dems and their key policies and ideas. What I'm going to go on to now is a number of other minor parties. So they're going to be in a bit less detail, but first looking at the SNP. So in terms of the historical development of the SNP, it was founded in 1934 and is a centre-left party whose main purpose is to secure Scottish independence from the UK. So the SNP's growing strength, kind of prior to the 1997 election, helped to convince Labour to take up the cause of devolution ahead of the 1997 election. Because Blair believed that granting devolution to Scotland would ensure that Labour remained the dominant political force in Scotland by giving the Scottish people just enough self-governing power so that they didn't vote for the SNP in the UK and in devolved elections. This strategy was really unsuccessful, however. It was successful until 2007, with Labour in power in Scotland until 2007. But in 2007, the SNP formed a minority government in Scotland under the leadership of Alex Salmond, and were able to turn this into a small majority in 2011, despite the fact that it's very difficult to get a majority under the additional member system, electoral system used in Scotland. Since 2016, they've been in power in Scotland either as a minority government or as the major party in a coalition with the Scottish Greens, who also support independence. The SNP's majority victory in 2011 led the Westminster government to agree to a Scottish independence referendum, which was held in 2014. So this is a really key moment for the SNP and a key success in being able to achieve the holding of that referendum. The independence campaign, however, was narrowly lost, which led leader Salmond to resign, and he was replaced by Nicola Sturgeon, who's been largely popular and had significant success both in Scottish and Westminster elections, but unexpectedly resigned recently in February 2023, saying she no longer had the stamina to continue and that it was the right time to quit. So a lot of that was in relation to the SNP success in the Scottish Parliament. They've also had significant success in Westminster. So Nicola Sturgeon became a kind of real key figure in UK politics, particularly during COVID when Scotland and England differed in approaches. And the SNP also had major successes in UK general elections under Sturgeon's leadership. In 2015, they won the vast majority of Scottish MPs, so 56 out of 59. 2017, that decreased to 35. It increased again to 48 in 2019. When English votes for English laws was in place, the power of Scottish MPs in Westminster was reduced, but it's since been scrapped. So the kind of power of SNP MPs, they can vote on more in Westminster, or kind of their votes can have more impact because it can't get vetoed by English MPs. But even when English votes for English laws wasn't in place, so there's more on that in the devolution video on the Politics Explained YouTube channel if you're not completely clear what FL is. But even when it was in place, SNP MPs often refrained from voting on matters that didn't affect their Scottish constituents out of principle and to emphasise their argument that there should be Scottish independence. So there's a lot of Scottish MPs and SNP MPs in Westminster now. They're kind of the third party, I think, at the moment. But that doesn't mean they necessarily vote on everything. In terms of the ideas and policies of the SNP's most important policy is, without doubt, Scottish independence from the United Kingdom, and they continue to pursue it by campaigning for a second Scottish independence referendum. They're also a left-wing party and have promoted policies similar to Labour's in the UK, including opposing austerity and arguing that it should be ended in 2017 and 2019. In 2023, the Scottish Government increased the higher and top rates of income tax so that both rates are now 2% higher than the rest of the UK, so showing that kind of left-wing commitment to slightly higher taxes and tackling inequality. They introduced free university tuition fees in Scotland, support immigration and want control over immigration to be devolved to Scotland. They're pro-Europe and want Scotland to rejoin the European Union once independent. They support further devolution in general, increased healthcare spending in the rest of the UK, and oppose Trident and argue it could be scrapped. So kind of generally a left-wing party, effectively, but of course, achieving Scottish independence is a really key policy for them. Okay, so the next minor party I'm going to look at is UKIP, which then morphed into the Brexit Party for the 2019 election. So UKIP began, so the UK Independence Party, UKIP, began as a fringe nationalist party in 1991, But by the 21st century, it was associated with one man and one issue. So that was Nigel Farage, key leader of UKIP, and opposition to Britain's membership of the EU, so really supporting Brexit. Farage was charismatic, and he had a kind of personality that kind of ordinary people felt they could relate to a bit more than mainstream liberal establishment politicians such as Cameron, Clegg, and Miliband. And therefore, he was able to appeal to voters disillusioned with the three main parties at a time where there was significant disillusionment with traditional politics. The profile of UKIP slowly grew, in large part due to the growing sense of dissatisfaction with the way in which the three main parties accepted the quickening pace of European integration and were quite supportive of the EU. And in the 2014 European elections, European Parliament elections, UKIP gained a total of 24 MEPs, making it the largest UK party in the European Parliament. In the 2015 general election, it won 3.9 million votes, a very significant number of votes, but this returned just one MP due to the first past the post electoral system, which damages minor parties. However, its growing support put pressure on the Conservative Party to commit to holding a referendum on leaving the EU, and therefore they were able to have significant influence. After securing victory in the 2016 EU referendum, Farage saw his job was done, and the party has steadily declined in importance since. By 2019, however, Britain had still not left the EU, and there was still a UKIP party, but it really became no longer relevant. And Nigel Farage launched the Brexit Party ahead of the May 2019 European Parliament elections to put pressure for a hard Brexit deal and oppose Theresa May's more moderate withdrawal agreement. So Brexit had been voted for, but it hadn't yet happened, and Nigel Farage wanted to have influence on the shape of the Brexit deal that took place. So the Brexit Party in the 2019 European Parliament elections won the most votes out of any party and the most seats at 30.5%. The threat that, or the most votes at 30.5% and the most seats as well. The threat the Brexit Party posed to the Conservative Party played a large part in the Conservative Party's shift to the right, with Boris Johnson, who was a lot more strongly supportive of Brexit and a hard Brexit deal, being elected as leader and pushing for that hard Brexit. Because of this shift to the right, Farage agreed not to stand Brexit Party candidates in seats with sitting Conservative MPs in the 2019 election. The party still won 2% of the vote, but didn't win any seats. But even though they didn't win any seats, Farage's goal was arguably achieved, as Johnson's Conservative passed a hard Brexit deal following the election. And then once again, after the 2019 election, the party largely fizzles out. It's rebranded as Reform UK, but has received little support following the achievement of its main purpose. So the Brexit Party and UKIP can be seen in part as a pressure group, really, that uses the electoral process. And Farage and the Brexit Party and UKIP have had a massive impact on UK politics, with Brexit being one of the most significant constitutional changes in the UK ever, and has really defined politics for years afterwards, and massively changed the Conservative Party as well. So even though UKIP and the Brexit Party weren't able to win an election or win many seats in the UK Parliament, they were able to have a massive influence on politics. In terms of the ideas and policies of UKIP/the Brexit Party, as I mentioned, the key policy of these parties was to leave the EU in a way that regained the UK political sovereignty and reduced immigration. So a real opposition to immigration was a key part of it. And UKIP/the Brexit Party is usually defined as a radical right-wing populist party. Final couple of parties I'm going to look at are the Green Party and Plaid Cymru. So the Green Party evolved from a party founded in 1933 as People, later changing its name to the Ecology Party, before changing its name to the Green Party in 1985. It won its first seat in Westminster in 2010, when Caroline Lucas won Brighton Pavilion. And in 2015, the party won more than 1 million votes across the UK, but failed to win any more seats. So again, minor parties being harmed by first past the post. In the 2019 European elections, they won 7 MEPs and 12% of the vote. And in the 2019 general election, they won 2.7% of the vote, but again, just one seat. Again, Caroline Lucas in Brighton Pavilion, and they increased their vote share by 1.1%. So were relatively successful in 2019. In terms of their ideas and policies, the Green Party's main focus is on environmental issues. So in their 2019 manifesto, they pledged a combined investment of over £100 billion a year in the Green New Deal to tackle climate change, supported getting to net zero emissions by 2030, opposed fracking, and supported the phasing out of fossil fuels and nuclear power in the UK in favour of renewable sources. They're also so that's their key policy. So similar to the SNP, sorry, where they have a key policy of Scottish independence. The Green Party have a key policy in terms of environmental issues, but they too are also a left wing party that's committed to reducing social inequalities. They're strongly pro EU, opposed to privatisation of the NHS. In 2019, they supported a universal basic income, and they also support a 4-day working week. And in 2019, they also supported abolishing tuition fees and a new wealth tax to fund the creation of new jobs. So generally quite left-wing parties aimed at kind of pursuing social equality, reducing inequality, and kind of using state action to do so, increase state spending to do so. Final minor party I'm going to look at is Plaid Cymru, which in English is the Welsh Nationalist Party, and it's officially committed to independence for Wales within the EU, but in practice has been kind of more concerned with the preservation of Welsh language and culture, as Welsh independence isn't a very popular cause and isn't very likely, at least in the near future. Key example of that is kind of promoting Welsh speaking in schools. They're also a centre-left pro-EU party that's strongly committed to tackling climate change, backing a second round EU referendum in 2019, devolution of taxation powers to the Welsh Parliament, and £20 billion in investment in green jobs. It's never had more than 4 MPs in Westminster, and they kind of only stand seats in Wales, but it's been more successful in the National Assembly for Wales. In 2007, Plaid became the second largest party in the Assembly and was in coalition with Labour until it dropped to third place and out of government after the 2011 election. And most recently, in the 2019 UK Parliament election, they won 4 seats and 0.5% of the vote. So that's it in terms of going through different minor or emerging parties. So that should give you some kind of key ideas on their policies, historical development, and some of the influence they've been able to have. What I'm going to look at now is some key debates. So that's looking at the party system and debates over the importance of minor parties. So starting off, looking at the party system. So there's a number of different party systems in the world. So the first one is a single or one-party system where there's only one party. These are dictatorships and other parties are banned. So for example, the Chinese Communist Party in China is a good example of this. Dominant party systems are where there are many parties, but only one holds power over a long period of time. For example, since the independence of Botswana in 1966, the Botswana Democratic Party has held power, even though it is a largely democratic country. Two-party systems are where the two main parties compete for power and are the only parties that can conceivably win. For example, the Democrats and Republicans in the United States, for example. And multi-party systems are where there are more than 2 different parties which are able to compete and kind of realistically compete for power. For example, in many European countries with proportional voting systems, such as Germany. In terms of the party system in the UK, due to the first past the post electoral system, which underrepresents minor parties, the UK has often been described as a 2-party system. This was especially true in the 19th century with the Liberals and the Conservatives, and in the post-World War II period with Labour and the Conservatives. Especially in the last 4 decades, the UK, however, could be described as a dominant party system. For example, between 1979 and 1997, it was only the Conservative Party in power. Then from 1997 to 2010, it was only the Labour Party. And since 2010, it's only been the Conservative Party in power. So it could be described as a dominant party system rather than a 2-party system. But obviously, you're able to debate that, especially based on kind of the closeness of elections. Due to the declining support for the 2 main parties in the 2010 and 2015 elections, there is an argument, and especially at the time, there was a key argument that the UK was an increasingly multi-party system, with the Liberal Democrats and SNP in particular winning significant numbers of seats, and and significant numbers of votes as well. In coalition with the Tory party, the Lib Dems were able to have a significant impact on policy and governing the UK from 2010 to 2015, but the first past post electoral system still prevented the Lib Dems from being able to be a major player rather than just a minor coalition partner, though, despite getting 23% of the vote. From the 2017 election, the 2 main parties increased their vote share again, though, and the UK could be argued to kind of have shifted back to a more clearly two-party system again, if you didn't think it kind of was a two-party system anyway. So yeah, first past the post really is key to determining the kind of type of party system. In the UK, the electoral system is always going to be really key. And especially in promoting a two-party system, first past the post is quite key to that. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to looking at the debate over the importance of minor parties in the UK. So that's looking at three different kind of ways to analyse it. So success in elections, ability to play a role in government, and impact over policy, where I'm going to look at arguments that minor parties are important and arguments that minor parties are unimportant, so that you can kind of see some key debates. And this is potentially a way you could structure an essay with these three topic paragraphs as well. So firstly, looking at success in elections, in terms of arguments that minor parties are unimportant, the first past the post voting system greatly reduces the power and relevance of smaller parties and benefits Labour and the Tories, one of whom has either been in government alone or is the majority partner in a coalition since the end of World War II. So the electoral system really does harm minor parties and uphold the power of the Labour and Conservative parties. And this was the case despite the core vote of the two main parties decreasing from over 80% in 1979 to just 66% in 2015, which then wasn't reflected in seats due to the voting system. Since the 2017 election, there's also been an increase in support for the two main parties, as I mentioned, with in 2017 the Labour and Tories winning 82.4% of the vote, and in 2019 they won 75.7% of the vote, so still a large proportion of the vote. The Lib Dems are perhaps the most striking example of a smaller party harmed by first past the post. In 1983, the SDP Liberal Alliance, for example, won nearly 26% of the vote, but just 46 seats. And in 2010, they won 23% of the vote, but just 57 seats. In 2015, UKIP won 3.9 million votes, but just one seat, whilst in 2019, the Lib Dems won just 11 seats with 3.7 million votes. So really showing how the first past the post electoral system really does uphold a two-party system and kind of prevent minor parties from having success in elections and being important in that regard. On the other hand, some minor parties who have geographically concentrated support have been able to have significant success under first past the post, including the DUP, SNP and Sinn Féin. For example, in 2015, the SNP won 56 seats with just 4.7% of the vote, whilst minor parties have also been able to have more success in local elections and elections to the European Parliament. So the most recent and kind of the last European Parliament elections in the UK in 2019, the Conservatives and Labour finished third and fourth, beaten by the Brexit Party and the Liberal Democrats, so minor parties. So that's it in terms of success in elections. Another way to analyse it is in terms of the ability of minor parties to play a role in government. So firstly, looking at arguments that minor parties are unimportant, Labour or the Conservative Party, as I mentioned, have always been in government since the end of World War II, on their own or as a major partner in a coalition. In the Welsh Parliament also, the Labour Party has dominated and always been in government since devolution. Even when in coalition, the major parties can be argued to dominate government and policy. So in the 2010 coalition government, the Conservative Party's austerity policy dominated, and the Lib Dems weren't able to keep their promise of not raising university tuition fees, which is something the Conservative Party supported doing. In terms of arguments that minor parties are important in terms of playing a role in government, they've been able to have a lot more electoral success in devolved bodies and have therefore been able to wield a significant amount of power and influence over policy as a result. The SNP, for example, has been in power in Scotland since 2007 and has been able to make significant policy changes, whilst minor parties have also been able to have significant influence as junior partners in coalitions or confidence and supply agreements in the UK Parliament. So the Lib Dems, for example, drove policies through such as increasing the personal allowance and introducing the 2015 Recall of MPs Act when in coalition with the Conservatives. And the DUP was able to have a significant impact over Brexit policy due to the power the party held due to a confidence and supply agreement with the Conservative Party following the 2017 election, playing a key part in the move towards a hard Brexit. So in that regard, minor parties can be argued to have significant influence in government and kind of ability to play a role in government. The final way I'm going to look at the debate over the influence of minor parties is in terms of their impact and influence over policy. On the one hand, it can be argued that the kind of influence of minor parties on policy is limited. So the two main parties, because they've always been in government in or one of them has always been in government in the UK Parliament, it can be argued they've been able to have a major impact over politics and policy in the UK, and they've made the key changes in relation to policy, not minor parties. So Thatcher, for example, was able to implement her New Right philosophy and massively change economic policy. Blair was able to have a massive impact introducing devolution, especially, and other constitutional changes, foreign policy of the Iraq War. And it can be argued that major parties are broad churches that represent a range of voters and policy positions, and therefore enable them to maintain significant support. And even when minor parties do have influence, it's often temporary and reverts back to the major parties having influence afterwards. So even when minor parties do influence policy, it's the two main parties that are able to determine the exact nature of these policies and water them down to an extent. So even if like the Brexit party influences the Brexit happening, it's the Conservative Party that ultimately decided on Brexit policy. So even if minor parties are able to kind of have some influence in influencing the major parties, it can be argued that that's limited, as it's the major parties that decide the exact shape of those policies. On the other hand, there's kind of some really persuasive arguments that minor parties are really important in terms of influencing policy. So minor parties have had significant indirect influence over policy through threatening the two main parties electorally, even if only in some constituencies and not overall, and using their platforms and public support to put issues on the political agenda. As a result, Labour and the Tories are often forced to take on many of the minor parties' policy suggestions in order to maintain their electoral success. In many ways, these parties could therefore be seen as pressure groups that use the electoral process to pursue their aims, rather than political parties that have an effective or realistic chance of forming a government. So a key example of this, as I mentioned, is Nigel Farage and UKIP and the Brexit Party. So the electoral threat that Nigel Farage and UKIP posed to the Conservative Party played a major role in David Cameron calling or kind of committing to a Brexit referendum in the 2015 election. Whilst his Brexit party, Nigel Farage's Brexit party, later played a key role in shifting the Tories into a more right-wing populist direction for the 2019 general election. The Green Party, though, even though it's less of an electoral threat, has also had success, and that's through its public support and political platform. And through that, the party has been able to raise the political profile of environmental issues and force Labour and the Conservatives to kind of support them and really develop key policies in this area. So in that regard, another way in which minor parties are able to influence policy. So yeah, that's everything in terms of kind of minor parties and debates over their influence. The final thing I'm going to look at in this video is kind of the final part in kind of 2.4, political parties in context, and that's the different factors that affect party success. So the first one of these is party funding, which can be seen as an important factor in the success of political parties, as those with significant funding are able to hire a lot of staff and spend a lot of money on advertising and campaigning during election campaigns, which enables well-funded parties to develop effective popular policies and reach a lot more voters than parties with less funding. The Labour Party, for example, receives significant funding from trade unions and donations. Got a lot more detail on this in another video on the Politics Explained YouTube channel on party funding, whilst the Tory Party receives major funding from businesses and rich individuals, which enables both parties to significantly outspend minor parties in the run-up to and between elections, and therefore maintain and can be seen as playing an important role in maintaining a two-party system. On the other hand, however, party funding can bring negative headlines and publicity for parties, especially when it's linked to possible corruption and therefore harm the popularity of parties. Another key factor that influences the success of parties in the UK is the electoral system. So in UK Parliament elections, first past the post is really key in only benefiting effectively parties with concentrated geographical support, who really benefit, while smaller parties with some support, but which is spread across the country, are greatly underrepresented. And therefore, the electoral system benefits Labour, the Tories and the SNP, as well as the DUP and Sinn Féin, but greatly harms the prospects of other minor parties such as UKIP, the Brexit Party, the Lib Dems, and the Green Party, who are consistently underrepresented. In elections to devolved bodies, however, more proportional electoral systems do allow smaller parties to have more success. Overall, kind of whilst the electoral system is without doubt key to the electoral success of parties and being able to get into government, small parties can have success and influence even when they're underrepresented, as I kind of just mentioned, in terms of through their ability to influence the policies of the two main parties. The next key factor that can be kind of cited in relation to party success is party leadership. So leaders are highly important to the success of political parties, particularly since the rise of TV and social media, and the consequent kind of increased presidentialization of UK politics, in which leaders are kind of seen as a lot more important. So leaders can provide a clear direction and leadership to their party and ensure they're providing a united, coherent, and persuasive vision to the public. Charismatic leaders also have the potential to reach beyond a party's core vote and increase the vote share of that party. So, for example, Boris Johnson in 2019 and Blair in 1997. Similarly, however, leadership can be important because poor and unpopular leaders can have a detrimental impact on the popularity of a political party and their success in elections. For example, Theresa May in 2017 and Jeremy Corbyn in 2019 are quite key examples of this. Popular and charismatic leaders can be particularly important for minor parties who struggle to gain political prominence and voter attention in the context of two-party dominance. So Nigel Farage and Nicola Sturgeon can be seen as really key examples of this, as well as Nick Clegg in the 2010 election campaign, as he was really successful and relatively popular. On the other hand, the influence of leaders on party success can be overstated, as local MPs play a key role, and many voters are likely to vote for the same party irrespective of their leader. Further, if the leaders of both main political parties are equally weak or kind of equally strong, leadership is likely to be a less important factor. Another factor influencing the success of political parties is the media. So how favourably the media presents a political party can be seen as an important factor in their success. The media is seen by many as playing a key role in shaping voters' political views and electoral behaviour, especially newspapers and political commentators on social media, which present an opinionated, biased view, unlike the majority of TV and the radio, which is obligated to be politically neutral. A significant majority of the press is right-leaning and supports the Tory party, which could be seen as an important factor in the political success and dominance of the Tory party over the past decade. Many who supported the Labour Party under Corbyn believe that this kind of right-wing dominance in the press kind of resulted in Corbyn and the Labour Party under Corbyn being presented extremely unfairly by the media when Corbyn was in power, which is argued by many to have damaged the chances of winning the 2019 and 2017 general elections. Tony Blair's ability to court the traditionally Conservative Party supporting papers, including The Sun, in the 1997 election, is seen by many as an important factor in Labour's landslide victory in that election. And Blair was able to portray himself very effectively in the media, in part due to New Labour's spin, which was kind of really trying to control the media agenda. The media can also play an important role by breaking key political scandals and events which can shape the public's view of parties, and Partygate in 2022 is a really key example of that. On the other hand, it can be argued that the influence of the media on party success shouldn't be overstated, as the media often only reports events and voters make up their own minds, rather than being influenced too much of an extent at all by what the media says. So there's kind of two sides of the argument you can have there. Another key factor in the success of parties is policy and reflecting the public's wishes. So the range of policies a party presents to the electorate is a key factor in their success. Successful parties are able to capture the public mood and develop attractive policies that gain support from significant sections of the population and therefore enable them to win votes and seats. The significant support received by UKIP in the 2015 election was largely due to how their main policy of Brexit appealed to a large number of voters who were disaffected with their lives in the political system and saw Brexit as offering change. The rise in support for the SNP can be seen in large part as a consequence of significant parts of the Scottish public's support for independence and general centre-left attitudes, so policy can be seen as really important rather than leadership, potentially. Policy that is too radical can also play an important role in contributing to the failure of political parties, as they're unable to appeal to a large enough group of voters. So, for example, in the 2019 election, the Labour Party's very left-wing manifesto and huge spending commitments, as well as their commitment to a second referendum, were arguably important factors in the electoral failure and subsequent resignation of Jeremy Corbyn. The final two facts I'm going to look at are competence when in government and party unity. So how competent a political party is when in government is also an important factor in their success. Voters reward parties who deliver on their manifesto policies and manage the economy and government effectively, whilst punishing those who don't. A key example of this is the dramatic drop in support for the Lib Dems after they participated in the coalition government with the Tories, They were punished severely by the electorate for failing to keep their promises to not increase university tuition fees and for their association with the Conservative Party's harsh programme of austerity. By contrast, Labour won the 2001 and 2005 elections, in part as a consequence of continued economic growth and effective public service provision when in power. And their loss in the 2010 election can be seen as due to the financial crash and perceived incompetence. Current polls suggest that the Conservative Party will be punished by the electorate in the next election for the reputation of incompetence and untrustworthiness that they have brought upon themselves through Partygate, Liz Truss's failed economic reforms, and the mishandling of COVID. So that's government competence as a factor in party success. The final factor I'm going to look at is how united a party is. So it can be argued that the level of unity within a party is important to party success. Parties that are united and unified appeal to the electorate as it gives them an air of competence and suggests that the party will be successful once in power, as they kind of have a clear vision and are kind of really unified. Divided parties, by contrast, seem weak, incompetent, and lacking in effective leadership, whilst failing to present an agreed upon, inspiring vision of hope to the electorate. 1997, for example, is a key example of this, when the Tory party's damaging divisions over Europe were important in their poor electoral performance. Their disunity contrasted with the newfound unity and clear vision of New Labour, the Labour Party under Blair. Similar can be said of the failure of the Labour Party in 2019, in which the party was divided between the more left-wing leadership and membership and significant sections of the parliamentary Labour Party, so current MPs and candidates, which was much more moderate, as well as there was also a key division over their second referendum policy. So yeah, that's everything in terms of content. I know that was a lot, and I'm sure you can kind of skip to different parts of the video when you're covering different content. In terms of the key kind of essay questions you get asked in relation to this topic, as I mentioned at the start of the video, get one, evaluate the view that the UK is a two-party system. In that, you could use some of the arguments in relation and debates in relation to the importance of minor parties and their influence over politics. You get one, kind of evaluate the view that minor political parties having an increasing impact on UK politics. In that, you could potentially use there's lots of different ways you could do this, but you could potentially use the kind of headings of success in elections, ability to form a government and have influence in government, and influence over policy. Evaluate the view that policy differences between parties are as important as the similarities between them. For that question, you could kind of, this one's one way you'd be considering the Tory and Labour parties as well, but you could do headings in terms of kind of, or party paragraph topics, in terms of economic policy, foreign policy, and law and order, or welfare policy potentially, or you could definitely do different heading, different paragraph topics, and kind of weigh up the different parties within that. And evaluate the argument that leadership is the most important factor determining the success or failure of political parties in the UK. In that's the final section of the video we were looking at. And you could effectively just pick 3 factors, where you kind of have for and against within for each factor, and evaluate at the end which factor you think is the most important factor determining the success of political parties. So yeah, that's everything for this video. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. And make sure to go to the Politics Explained website, linked in the description, if you're kind of interested in accessing the PDF for this video, or purchasing any essay plans. So I'm going to make kind of key detailed essay plans for these, as well as the whole of the UK politics and UK government and ideologies topics. And yeah, also you can sign up for tutoring on the Politics Explained website if that's something you'd be interested in. But yeah, that's pretty much everything, and I'll see you in the next video.